Morning, everyone. My name is Donna O'Donnell, and I'm your IVAR 2020 president. And on behalf of IVAR's board of directors, I really want to extend a really warm welcome to all of you participating in today's webinar. IVAR is so very proud to have C.A.R. CEO Joel Singer with us today, and I'm sure, as always, he's going to bring us great information. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a disruption in all of our lives, but in spite of these challenges, we've all faced the last 5 months, and we're all moving forward. We're all working hard, and we're helping our clients and doing whatever we can to support our industry. We remain positive and learn best practices during this unprecedented time. So with that being said, I'm proud to introduce today's webinar moderator, IVAR CEO, Mark Dowling. Mark, it's yours.
Thank you, Donna. I appreciate the introduction. And before I introduce our featured speaker today, let me just kind of identify the fact that this is a webinar and Joel Singer will be giving a formal presentation. However, there will be some Q&A available. So for anybody wanting to ask questions, you can do so by using the Q&A tab on your screen. You can type in a question, and if it's a good question and we have time, we will hopefully be able to present that to Joel and introduce that. So with that, I will now introduce the Chief Executive Officer with the California Association of Realtors, Mr. Joel Singer. Joel has set a new standard of leadership in organized real estate, and Joel has held the C.A.R. top position as the CEO for more than 30 years, wherein he oversees the association's objectives in business development, strategic planning, legislative policies, and creating products so that real estate professionals can succeed in today's changing real estate market. Ladies and gentlemen, Joel Singer is a titan in the realtor world, where he is both a statewide and national leader. And I'm very happy and proud to have him here at IVAR for this meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Joel Singer. The Zoom floor is yours, sir. And as you flip over here, I will cue up your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Donna and Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. I recognize that these are very difficult times still, and challenging times, and I appreciate the invitation, and it's very nice to see you guys. I think one of the things that we all struggle with in this environment is we can't see our friends, and we can't see people who we really want to see and want to talk to. And before I get into my my presentation, just a couple things if I could. One, first and foremost, from the standpoint of organized real estate, this has been a unique and trying time, obviously. We've seen our members get effectively shut down for a few weeks. We've experienced members who've gotten ill with COVID and lost loved ones. We've experienced all sorts of challenges. We've had to be out of the office, as many of you have. We've had to be completely out of the office since early March. We actually got out a little bit earlier than the governor's orders. And during this entire period, I've been struck by a couple things. One is the resilience of our members, and two, the ability of us to create and maintain community. Despite all the barriers, all the difficulties in front of us, the fact that we can't really see each other the way we're normally used to. And I guess that resilience, I think, is really clear, and I'll talk about it when I go through this economic presentation, by the fact that real estate has come back so quickly. And it's a real tribute to each and every one of the members on this call. And moreover, I think one of the things that we have to understand is that this is going to be a difficult period of time. Even though right now sales are extraordinarily strong, we're going to go through some bumps, and it's not going to be straight up hill. It's not going to be that V-shaped recovery we all hope for, although I hope it's pretty V-shaped. But the fact of the matter is, as we've already seen, real estate is going to come out of this quite well. Residential real estate, in my view, is going to be really the driver of the recovery. And so far, if you look in California, that's been the case. And obviously, in an area like yours where you've had more residential real estate growth, I think there's real reasons to be optimistic and confident. And I have to tell you, having observed this industry as long as I have, I've just been amazed by how adaptable, how, the industry has been, each of you have been, to creating a situation where, with everything stacked against us, the marketplace has recovered so quickly, and people now recognize more than ever, if there's one theme that I think we all need to keep in mind, people recognize more than ever the value of home ownership, the value of where you reside, where you live. And that's going to pay real dividends for us in the future. So with that, let me just run through very, very quickly a housing market update. As with all housing market updates, we're looking a little bit behind, but one of the things we have been able to do, and we appreciate the support and cooperation of many of the MLSs and associations, we're able to look at the market on a weekly basis. And the news for the last several weeks has been very, very positive. Mark, if you can start going through the slides with me. Let's start with the coronavirus. This is a little bit old, but the fact of the matter is that it's still with us, and it's not going to disappear quickly. Some of you may know my daughter is a chief nursing officer of a hospital in Marina Del Rey, subsidiary of Cedars-Sinai, which is one of our big hospitals in LA. And things are getting better, without question. Death rates are definitely coming down. When you look at the California numbers, we're always on top of everything. Well, guess what? Of course we're on top of everything. Our population is twice that of Florida. Florida's rate effectively over the last 3 weeks has been more than double the California rate. Texas's rate is double the California's rate. But nevertheless, when I look at the California statistics, on the rate of COVID, we're right in the middle. We're about 23 to 27, depending on what day you look at it, based per capita. And we've certainly had a rough stretch here in Southern California. I know the Riverside area of San Bernardino, as well as all of Los Angeles County, have had a rough stretch, but it is now finally getting better. The real question is, how quickly does it improve? Do we have a surge in the fall when influenza returns? And I know the public health authorities are expecting it. I think we have to be on guard that may occur. And I've always been impressed by the fact that realtors have really gone out of their way. And when I talk to your clients, I always get the comment that my realtor has been really good about trying to preserve our community health and our health. And I think we just need to continue to do that. And even though I think the news will be good for some period of time, there is some uncertainty on COVID if you look towards the end of the year. So next slide. Oops, going the wrong way, Mark. There we go. Positivity rate was slightly up, but California is testing much more. And in a sense, I think if everybody was testing at the California level, we would look even better than I said. We'd probably be in the bottom third from a rate basis. But clearly, we did open up a bit too fast. And I think the fact of the matter is that it is a contagious disease, and we're just going to have to keep it in the environment for a while. I'm, from a personal standpoint, from the time I spend looking at the science, I do believe that we're going to get a vaccine. We're going to get further improvements in terms of treatment. And as a result, I think this becomes a far lesser of an issue. But I think from a planning perspective, we have to plan on this influencing us for the next 6 to 9 months for sure. I would like to think by July 1 of next year, this becomes something that is in the environment and we're able to deal with pretty normally. Travel starts to return, face-to-face meetings are allowed, but and hopefully it'll be a bit sooner than that. But if not, I'm pretty convinced that we can make it through that period of 8, 9, 10 months, whatever it is, in fairly good fashion. From the real estate industry standpoint, I'm not so sure it's going to be quite as easy from other industry standpoints. Next slide. Just the general economics. I mean, this is a sharp, sharp contraction. We've never experienced anything like this when you've been forced to shut down, but this is looking backwards. If we look at what's happening in GDP growth, this didn't include the second quarter's statistics that we would have liked to see for the second quarter, but we're already starting to see growth. There's no question that we'll see positive growth in the third quarter, which initially we weren't sure about. So that's, you know, from our standpoint, the good news, but we're coming from a big drop. And my biggest concern, those of you who deal with non-residential real estate, the commercial and retail space, is small business. I've seen reports that say about 10% of the small businesses today have already shut their doors. There's projections that it go up to 30 or 40%. We're unique in the real estate industry. We have recovered revenues for the most part, but if you look at restaurants, you look at travel, you look at most small businesses, they haven't. And there's a bigger aspect of this. Next slide, Mark. And that is that we've trained people to do things differently. People who've never thought of grocery delivery, who've never thought of buying everything on Amazon, all of a sudden are living in the virtual retail world. And so how that rebounds back for malls, how that rebounds back for small businesses isn't particularly clear. This chart shows unemployment, and again, a huge increase in unemployment, 15 million unemployed, 15% unemployment rate, 15 million unemployed for a short while in time. It appeared in California, but as you can see, it's bouncing back. Today's news wasn't particularly good on unemployment applications, but unemployment will bounce back. And this is the biggest wild card for California, and particularly Southern California. Next slide, please. Jobless claims dropped for the first time. Today, as I said, the news was worse. It went back up, but it's coming down, but you're still looking at a big backlog. As you can see, that 15 million figure I was talking about for California combined jobless. And that's really going to be the wild card. By the end of the year, we're still going to be looking, in my opinion, and our forecast says the low double digits on unemployment. And despite that, we're going to see a good real estate market. So you can imagine why we're so optimistic when we look at the residential side towards the second half of next year when things normalize. And even between then and now, I think you're going to see sales activity at a reasonable level. But this is a big drop. You know, it's just very, very difficult when you've got that much unemployment to expect the market that we'd like to have. And we'll talk more about that as I go through this presentation. Next slide, please. Recovery continues, but as I said, a slower rate. Next slide. And again, I think it's important to recognize that this has been an unequal recovery, and it really matters at a social level. It matters at an economic level. The incidence of COVID has been much, much more severe in communities of color. And by the same token, the unemployment rates have been more severe, as unfortunately they tend to be historically for African Americans and Latinos. And so this is also reflected in the housing market. We've seen that the housing market has established record median prices for coastal California and most of California. The state median, it's the highest level ever. This is not an equal downturn. And unfortunately, it won't be an equal recovery either. And that also is one of the reasons why I'm not as optimistic as I would like to be in the short run, even though I'm very, very optimistic in the longer and intermediate term. The market update, very quickly. Here's what we reported in July. We're up 6.4% year to year statewide. And on a percentage basis, when we look at price, we're at 666,320, which is almost 10% above last year. The unsold inventory is way down to 2.1 months. Median days on the market, 17 days. This market is an incredibly hot seller's market. When you look at communities in almost all parts of the state, it's not equal, obviously, but it's a very strong market. Next slide. And sales are up, as I said earlier, particularly for high-end markets. If you look at the $2 million plus market, and this, again, you can translate this in any way you want. Part of this is that homes are becoming more expensive, but the biggest increase is in the very high end. And that also talks about how this recession has hit. If you're in a high-tech industry, you're working at home, nothing has changed for you from an economic standpoint. If you're in an essential industry, you're probably working, but you may not be, and certainly the likelihood of you having salary cuts or being furloughed, or for that matter, even losing your job, is so much higher. And this is kind of the difficulty where you've seen the biggest increases being in these near suburban markets. Some of the highest priced real estate in California has seen the largest increase, while markets that are affordable and are going to be the long-term growth beneficiaries, and I would say the IVAR region is clearly going to be one of those, have not seen the great acceleration that we've seen over the last 4 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks even, in some of the higher price markets. Next slide. And people are motivated. This is a survey we do. When we asked them, is it a good time to buy a home? It went up even as the COVID virus hit hard. And you can see what happened is all of a sudden people in March and April said, oh, bad time to sell a home, prices are going to come down. And you can see what's happened since. People now increasingly understand that it's a good time to sell a home, a really good time to sell a home. And if they're able to do so without health risk, they're a persuadable marketplace. And I know you're knocking on their doors and finding people who are listening. It is a terrific time to sell a home. Not so good to buy a home because of that short inventory, as we talked before. Next slide. But that attitudinal change, by the way, is remarkable. It's one of the fastest attitudinal changes we've ever seen towards the positive. And people are motivated by low rates. The lower rate environment makes a huge difference. Even with these price increases, until the last week or so, average monthly payments, median monthly payments were down lower than they were a year or 2 years ago. And sometimes substantially down, depending on what market you're in. And so that affordability, which we expect to continue in terms of mortgage rates for the foreseeable future, certainly for the next 18 months, there's no reason to believe that there's going to be a very large increase, if any, in the mortgage rates. In fact, the spreads right now are exceptionally high between the 10-year and the mortgage rate. We think this is going to be the basis for continued strong performance in residential real estate, despite that economic numbers I cited to you earlier. Next slide. Many are catching up, obviously, when we survey our buyers. It's just a catch up. When you ask, did people delay their plans? They did. And then, of course, when we saw the closings, particularly for July, August closings will be equally strong. This is part of the catch up. It gets a little more difficult when we start looking out towards September, particularly that unknown period in the last quarter of the year where we also may be dealing with a surge in the virus. Next slide. Mortgage applications on the purchase side are still way up. And again, this is a great sign. Relates back to that affordability through the low interest rates that I talked about. Next slide. And pending sales in July had the biggest increase since April of 2012. In fact, our July number for the state as a whole was the highest sales number in 32 months. I mean, this is not just compared to last year. We're talking about a very, very hot market, depending on where you are. I can speak for where I happen to live, which is right at the Los Angeles-Ventura line, about as far as you can go without getting out of Los Angeles County, and about 35 miles from downtown LA. This marketplace, because it is suburban, has seen the same type of increase you've seen in some other communities. And for example, there's also this movement to what used to be second home environments, because we've discovered that all you need is a good internet, right? So Lake Tahoe sales are up 130% over last July, if you can imagine. And that trend is also one that we expect to see continued, but not quite at the same levels as we've currently seen. Next slide. Pending sales at the top end, as we said already, outpaced the more affordable marketplaces. Next slide. And that high-end emphasis pushed the median price to record levels. And you can see, the California median price now is pretty much above the previous records, but now is solidly above for some period of time. where we were before the Great Recession. But it's also worth noting that at the Great Recession, when we knew that that kind of home ownership wasn't sustainable, you can see how deep and how long the fall in prices lasted. No matter what happens in this market, and I shouldn't say that, but I'm going to say it, this market is much more protected in terms of price decreases. The fact that you've got low mortgage rates built into the environment, the fact that you have such low inventory compared to population, the fact is that people who have bought homes are eminently well qualified, and there will be some increase in foreclosures, in my opinion. All of that suggests that no matter what happens in this marketplace for the next 3 months, and as I say, I'm bullish generally, this marketplace is not the same marketplace as where we were in 2004, 5, and 6. And I think it's important to recognize that, and I think your clients increasingly recognize that as well. Next slide. Per square foot price, same thing, highest since late 2007. Again, part of that is the mix moving towards those higher end communities. Next slide. Again, same thing. Next slide. And active listings. This is really also the key. If active listings were higher, we would be in a much better position in terms of sales. Sales, which I said were a 32 months high, would probably be 15 to 25% higher if we had the normal amount of listings. The problem here is when we look at this number, this is the one number. Demand is getting better, but the number that isn't getting better is the number of listings. And that's really going to be the key. And to a large degree, the virus is what dictates that. The number of people who are just unwilling to list, even though they have housing needs that they want to adjust, even though they know it's a great time to sell, but are unwilling or unable because of her health risks to list is what really is constraining an already strong market. We would be dramatically stronger were it not for this case. Next slide, please. And again, the supply continues to drop. You can see Southern California's drop is much larger than the drop in inventory in the Bay Area for a whole series of reasons that I don't need to explain. Next slide. Active listings dropped, in particular in the low end markets, they dropped despite the fact that high end was the big increase. High end always carries listings for a much longer period of time relative to sales. The inventory is much higher. We have a real shortage across the spectrum, particularly at the low end. The affordable first time end is very much stressed by the lack of inventory. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about your marketplace. You know a lot more about it than I do, but you're also up 10%. You're up 11.1%, higher than that state increase. But the number of active listings are down 54.4%. This is actually, an incredibly strong marketplace because you've also been hit harder. The state as a whole has been less hard than Southern California on the COVID virus. It's been less hard. It's been hit harder in Southern California on the job loss. And you look at your median days on the market at 22, you look at 100% active listings, you're in a multiple offer environment, and sales to list prices are inflexible. It took a while for buyers to realize that. I think they've now realized that, so that the market will continue to proceed quite strongly. And again, you're well positioned, and I think in particular because of the unique COVID history you've had in Riverside County, that you're going to see probably a little steadier recovery than some parts of the state. I'm a little less worried about the Inland Empire in the fourth quarter than I am other parts of the state, but that unemployment factor is still the one concern. Next slide. San Bernardino County, the story looks very much the same. This is again a reflection that people also are looking for that bigger home. They're looking for that swimming pool. They're looking where they can get their whole family together, and they're looking for single family homes. And all of that dictates well for your region. And again, I also think your region has done a much better job than most in creating affordable housing. And with those low interest rates, hopefully we can see a dramatic increase in the percentage of homeowners across the spectrum, and particularly the underserved communities where the homeownership rate is so much less among people of color. We'll start to see that move in the right direction. Next slide. Again, zeroing in more, pending sales look very, very strong. You've got a baked in next 2 months of strong sales. And again, when you look at this, this is going all the way back to March of 17, January of 17 rather. You can see just how strong activity has been in your area, much stronger, despite it, that dip everyone saw, that 40% dip. You've come back very, very quickly. That is V-shaped. I wish the whole economy looked like this chart. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Because if the whole economy looked like this, we would absolutely be positioned for one of the most phenomenal markets ever. But this tells you the strength of the real estate market, and I think explains the optimism we should all have when we're looking at the next couple of years for residential real estate. Next slide. The outlook. We expect sales to surge further, as I said, in August, but begin to slow in the fall. Part of that is seasonality. Part of that is we just want to be on the cautious side in terms of the virus, and we've got the non-V-shaped recovery in key parts of the economy, particularly travel. We've seen massive layoffs by the airlines. They're still coming. Again, the positioning of the Inland Empire, your relationship to the virtual marketplace, is exemplified, in Ontario by so much of our virtual marketplace. Amazon, Ontario shuts down, Amazon's in deep trouble. The fact of the matter is, I think this particular region is probably better positioned than any, but it's that virus and the impact, particularly on the virus, on the number of listings that we have to be concerned about, coupled with unemployment and people's economic, security feelings in the last quarter of this year. If you're asking me about, the second half of 2021, I think we're going to be way above these marks. All things being equal, it could be a little delayed, it could come a little earlier, but we've just got to get through that period of about 6 months when people are still going to be uncertain and the virus is still going to be limiting the number of listings, limiting people's ability to enter marketplaces, and small businesses have not fully recovered and many of them are closing. So that's the real trick. Next slide. Again, we think the median price is going to continue to go up. People who are buying today are buying, I think, as I said earlier, into a marketplace that doesn't look anything like the peak marketplace we saw in 2005 and 6. And I think there's, when people ask you, are these prices too high? The answer is, yeah, they are too high. But the fact of the matter is, you can explain them by low mortgage rates. You can explain them by the fact that cash gets no return at all today, and both investors and in particular people who want to adjust their housing needs in light of shelter-in-place orders, in light of being part of a mobile workforce, all of that has contributed to demand for housing that hasn't been realized yet. And that realization has created a price plateau at this level that I think is from my perspective, sustainable. Next slide. The new normal. Again, the new normal is unclear at this point, but I can tell you from personal experience, I don't anticipate that the C.A.R. staff, we're a staff of about 130 people, I don't anticipate that we are going to need anywhere near the commercial space we've used before. By allowing people to operate virtually, in our case, and I was going to talk about this at the start, but I'll talk about it for a second. Now, we have seen our staff completely remote set absolute records in terms of the number of calls we've dealt with on the legal hotline. We've set absolute records. Some of you have called our COVID relief hotline, where we're operating much more efficiently than we would operate in an office environment. People are working longer. The commutes have turned into longer hours. Everything I measure suggests to me that at least our staff, and we happen to have a very good technology platform, is as efficient working remotely. When you look at other companies, those that are truly in the software world, entertainment, the norm is going to allow you to do this. And the advantage of doing this, you're already seeing. If you don't have to commute into downtown LA, you can pick very nice places to live. You can pick places where you do get that single family home. You get that space, you get the better schools, you get the swimming pool that your kids need when they're in a virtual learning environment or their summer camps are closed. And I think that, again, bodes very well from where you are, and we're seeing it. As I said, the demand in places like Lake Tahoe, the demand in all of far Northern California, the foothill parts of the state has been extraordinarily strong. The strongest large regional market in California has been the Central Coast, because as long as you've got an internet, you're going to be able to, in many instances, to work more remotely. And the good news about this all, of course, is we can attract and retain people who otherwise might go other places, because the burden of working in California, the commute times in particular, and the cost of commuting is so high. So I think this is good for you regionally. I think it's probably good for California, although it also opens the doors to people to work from Austin, Texas. And again, a personal example, I now have 4 people of those 130 working out of state for a whole series of reasons. They can do it very effectively. You wouldn't know it if you talked to one of my out-of-state attorneys. You'd have no idea that they're now working out of state. And the fact of the matter is, if we don't address housing affordability and the quality of life in California generally, that's a risk as well. Next slide. There we go. And members have been talking about this. There's a real opportunity, obviously, for second homes. I know some of your members do deal with second homes. Obviously, you've got the desert communities out there. Members out there are feeling it. You've got the mountain communities, Big Bear and Lake Arrowhead. But the fact of the matter is, there's a real interest in this, and our realtors, when we survey them, are seeing that throughout the state. Next slide. But the real key on the new normal from my perspective is that home, and I've said this repeatedly during this presentation, home ownership and home, the concept of what it means to have your home, has become far more valuable than at any time in recent memory. It means that you can work from your home and remotely, and it means you have to have a better space to work in many instances, right? But it's also clear that it's not just a place to live now. It's a place to work. It's a place to be safe. It's a place to be together with your family. And the fact of the matter is, what we're seeing and what we see in a bunch of consumer surveys is people are saying they want a bigger house at the moment. They want more space. They want an office. They want more outdoor amenities. And all of that bodes well for residential real estate for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please, Mark. The new normal has a downside, though, for those of you in retail and office sales. And I don't know how severe it will be, but I do think we've already seen some of it kick in. The U.S. retail industry, and this is a conservative number, quite frankly, will lose 11 to 17% of its store count by 2025. I personally believe that might be a number too low. That's 100,000 retail stores nationwide, and it could easily go up to 150,000. Frankly, today I heard a number that was more than twice this high as a possibility on the downside. And Global Workplace Analytics, was just one of the companies, predicts that 30% of the people will work at home multiple days per week within a couple of years. I think that is an absolute reality, as I've said earlier. Some of you who are closely involved, as Donna is, and Mark are, know that at C.A.R. we already were planning to scale down our office building from a gross 52,000 square feet to 30,000 square feet. Quite frankly, we may have to redesign it to go even lower than that, because my anticipation is that I'd rather have my attorneys work from home, where they can get all their online materials to answer your calls, and I can see my call volume going up 10 to 15%, by saving that commute and by working at home than coming into the office 5 days a week and dealing with the stress of the commute. Now, obviously, those of us who work near downtown Los Angeles are more disadvantaged on the commute than almost anyone else. But the fact of the matter is, I think this trend is very real, and increasingly, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the office space. Now, there's a good news here, a good news story here too. And again, I have to commend your local authorities and the work that Mark and the team have done with local authorities. This is an opportunity to convert housing from those failed retail and office locations. And ironically, there was a bill yesterday to make it easier to do that in the state legislature that failed. Stunningly, I thought, and I won't talk about that much today, but this is a real opportunity, because if you look at the opportunity in California to turn, for example, failed malls into housing, they already have the link to transportation, which is becoming less important anyway, as we discussed in a more remote environment. They also will actually reduce traffic locally if you convert them from retail to housing. And moreover, the development is already there. And in many instances, a closed mall is not in most instances, in every instance, is neither attractive nor a revenue source for local government. We need to think about what we can do to, in a realistic way, accelerate that conversion and create the housing opportunities that we just haven't had, to make sure that housing is more affordable, and to make sure that Californians have choices and start to really grow the economy again in terms of California versus the rest of the United States. Next slide. The key takeaways from my standpoint is the economy is bouncing back, but outside of real estate, we have this jaundiced perspective. We've seen a V-shaped recovery. Most other industries haven't, and small business in particular, travel sectors, a lot of other sectors haven't. So be concerned, preserve capital, for that uncertainty in the last little part of the year and the first part of next year. But sales will remain reasonably strong, and prices will remain elevated. We think the supply will not improve much. Obviously, any listing you can get is far more valuable than it's been at any time in the recent past. So focus your attention on the listing market. And then again, from my standpoint, with low interest rates, recognize that there is a very strong market coming. Put in place the systems you need as an agent or a broker to be able to take advantage of that market growth. One of the things that is always said: don't waste a good crisis. It seems to me this is a chance for all of us to build our businesses to be more future-proof. We learned how to do things over the last couple of months. All of you did things in terms of virtual closing, virtual tours. Everybody now uses e-signature. If there was somebody who wasn't using them before, it's pretty much over in the last 60 days. Think about how you can automate the business not for the next bout of coronavirus, but to make you more efficient. Think about whether you need all that extra space in your real estate office, with your agents now having learned better how to operate in the virtual world. This is a chance for us to also be prepared and really take advantage of the boom by doing something we haven't done for years, which is not just do well in the marketplace, but actually increase our return and become more efficient and get a real competitive advantage over the industries that are trying to still dislodge us. And I think that's one of the lessons that we all have to take advantage of in the coming weeks. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to turn, if I could, for the subject that I think is really important. But before I do, obviously, as I said, we're very optimistic for residential real estate. We think there's opportunities to do the conversion. And again, I want to commend all of you for the agility you've shown, the flexibility you've shown. The way that realtors always adapt to the market just amazes me. And I don't think it's accidental that the real estate market's been V-shaped. I think there's a lot of things in our favor, but when all is said and done, I think it's a tribute to all of the real estate community and those selling houses in California have been particularly adaptable, and they're the ones who really have made that marketplace. I think sometimes we forget, but each one of you is able to make a marketplace. And if you look over the near term, the way to make this marketplace is to obviously continue to work closely with your clientele. In particular, talk to people if they're in a position where they can safely list their home and are thinking about adjusting their housing at any time in the near future. It's an incredible time to do so. And I'll leave it at that as I turn to this last area. I think all of you by now, I hope most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the Proposition 19 that's going to be on the ballot in the November election year in California. That was a bill that was sponsored by realtors initially. As it was amended through the legislative process, it attracted a lot of other co-sponsors. It was adapted a little bit, but it is a bill that provides home protection for seniors, and in particular, it starts to address that concern we have in California, where if you look at people over 60, many of them have been living in their home. If you look at people over 55, for that matter, which is the age of relevance here, have been living in their home for decades. And the two penalties of capital gains, and moreover, the penalty, what happens if you move and have to take a new Prop 13 assessment, has restricted that whole part of the marketplace for coming on and becoming that part of that listing supply that I've been talking about all day as being so very, very scarce. So that initiative is on the ballot. Next slide. I won't spend a lot of time on this because we're going to be talking to you about it a lot. But the history of this goes back to an effort 2 years prior where we put a proposition on the ballot. It wasn't going to pass, so we didn't spend any effort doing it. But this one will be on the ballot, and we think it has an outstanding chance of passing. I've been looking at the surveys. Next slide. The overview of it is that it extends portability for Prop 13 tax savings, like Proposition 60 and 90 did. It extends it throughout the state. It allows family transfers to occur, and it extends it to people with severe disability and victims of natural disasters. So you're going to be able to talk to your elderly or more elderly, I hate to use that word since I'm in that group, clientele, and suggest to them that in fact they can move much more easily, and their penalty on the property tax standpoint can be removed much more easily than any time in the past. And it can be used multiple times. I won't go into the details of this because we will be talking to you about it quite a bit. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at capital gains, even in the most expensive parts of the states, that's a big drawback. But it is in the Inland Empire and most parts of California, quite frankly, the Prop 13 penalty for people is much larger. And we hope by removing most of that penalty, we can in fact get people to list their homes. They can have more choice in where they move, and they can create that new inventory for future first-time buyers and the resurgent trade-up market that we expect as well. Next slide, please. Again, why don't we just, I won't go through this in any detail, Mark. Next slide. We'll be talking to you about a lot, and I want to leave a chance for any questions if there are any. We've gotten support from Republican, Democratic, state elected officials across the board. The Republican Party stayed neutral on this. They have some concerns, and they're indebted heavily to the Jarvis Group. But we've got the Democratic Party endorsement. We're supported by the California Farm Bureau, the Fresh Fruit Association, the Cattlemen's Association. California businesses are universally in favor of the Business Roundtable, the Business Industry Association, the California Business Property Association. The firefighters have been our strongest allies here because this does create more funds for local firefighting districts in some instances. The League of California Cities and dozens of individual elected officials are supporting us, and senior groups, of course, are supporting us. So we've got lots of support. I urge you to read up if you're not convinced already, but do vote for this proposition on the ballot in November. And with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks and turn it back to Mark. And again, there's other detail, Mark. You can push out any of this that you see appropriate to your membership, obviously. But thanks again for having me, and I wish everyone, obviously, a very successful rest of the year and a safe and healthy one, especially.
Thank you so much, Joel. I appreciate the comments and your presentation. Just to let all our participants know, this presentation will be made available on IVAR's website by tomorrow. In addition to that, today's webinar will also be available on our YouTube channel. So we'll be pushing that out to our membership as well. So if you have a question, you can either hop on the chat line or the Q&A and get your question in. But as the moderator, I'm going to jump to the front of the list and ask the first question, which is, Joel, you had mentioned briefly that there was a piece of legislation that did not pass yesterday at the state level, and it had to do with converting retail places and commercial properties into residential units. One of the challenges, and as an ex-planning commissioner for County of San Bernardino, communities as citizens don't want development, and they certainly don't want high-density housing. So we've seen the state try to do more relative to getting involved in local control issues. And there's quite a bit of tension there. And it's one that we have historically, as a realtor association, has stayed away from. But I think we're getting pulled back into it because, quite frankly, we need construction, we need inventory, and our citizens need it, more importantly.
Yeah, Mark, it's you know, one of the advantages I have of being here forever is I've seen a huge transition there. We generally and historically have always believed in local control. That is one of the ethos and central tenets of realtors, because realtors believe in local communities. You contribute to your communities, you create your communities. And we feel that that can be done in different ways, and therefore we've always been a local control organization. But over the last 10 years, I think that's changed in one area, and that area is the promotion of housing and development. And the reason I think it's changed is because you guys are actually, you guys are one of the better examples. I know it may not feel that way sometimes. You've allowed construction, you've facilitated, and I think you're very close actually to meeting your projected needs. Not quite at the level we would like to see, but so many communities throughout California have absolutely and totally resisted getting their fair share of housing. And they've created the problems that I talked about on commuting. They've created the problem that is even, it's a social problem. Access to housing by, as I said, lower income individuals and people of color. In California, we pride ourselves on being a diverse community. We pride ourselves on creating opportunities for everyone. And, you know, this is, you know, as a son of immigrants and you know, California is a shining light because it's the area of opportunity. But the one thing that so many communities, and again, I'm not speaking so much about you guys, but so many communities in California have locked the door on people. And as a result, the realtors over the last 5 years have now taken the position, after for years stressing local control and designing carrots and incentives for people to take their fair share of housing. We've now increasingly moved by necessity, and I don't think we take a lot of joy in it, towards creating legislation that actually compels those communities that haven't done their fair share, that have been totally resistant to creating housing for all classes of citizens, that we have to compel them to do them. We have to penalize them if they don't. And I hope that changes. And I think this, again, is a reset that we've seen over the last few months. But I am concerned. People don't want the density. They didn't want it when you had to commute. Now, if you're not commuting, I think it changes attitudes too. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, but at the moment, we still feel that we have to compel people to take their fair share of housing, or we're going to see California becoming the state we don't want it to be.
Yes. Okay, we have a few questions, so let me get to those. Vicky Carpenter said, hi, Joel. What are your thoughts on Fannie and Freddie imposing a 0.5% fee on refinance mortgages that they purchase?
It's an incredibly bad time to do it. You know, you couldn't think of a worse time to do that. And it's being done for all the wrong reasons. It was imposed by the FHFA. The director of the FHA, Mark Calabria, who I happen to know, is dead set on only one thing, and that's privatizing and reducing the footprint of Fannie and Freddie. This is one way to do it. In general, we often are of the opinion that you could have a different price for refis, and especially cash out refis. But in today's marketplace, where people's equity is a lifesaver for them, it's the worst possible time to do it. And as I say, it was done really for a much longer term reason. And that longer term reason is inappropriate from our perspective, no matter what. So Vicki, we've written letters, we've talked, NAR's engaged, we've met directly with Dr. Calabria and let him know how unhappy we are about much of what he's setting up to do. And quite frankly, his efforts are completely counterproductive generally in terms of access to home ownership.
Very good. Next question is from Brent Bichtel. Says, with multiple offers running 20 to 40,000 above asking and appraisals coming in below listing, what, if anything, can CAR do to help with this issue? It's
a great question, and there's no question that appraisals are not coming up to the current prices. That market, as you saw, moved so quickly that part of that's understandable. The other part is not, and that is that appraisers need to, especially when I hear the appraisals are coming below listing. From my perspective, if you have a fair and open sale, and when you've got multiple offers, that's a fair and open sale. That tells you that that appraisals need to be adjusted. They may not need to be adjusted to the most extreme price, but what I'm hearing in that question is that, and I hear it often, and I've seen it through cycles before, that appraisers, as usual, are in particular out of area appraisers. I don't know to what degree that's still an issue where you guys are. I suspect less so. You seem to have more appraisers in most parts of the state. They obviously need to understand the marketplace better. By doing what we're doing, and we're pushing out data, we're talking to lenders, we're trying to talk to appraisers. They're too busy to talk in many ways at the moment, which I guess is a good sign in some ways. But clearly, from a regulatory standpoint, we also believe that the whole appraisal concept needs to be rethought. And in fact, I hate to say this, and I don't want to offend anyone, but in these marketplaces, the virtual appraisals that are done actually are much more reflective of the actual value of a home than the appraisals that are done by appraisers going out to the site. And that should scare appraisers. That should really make them nervous. They need to understand that these marketplaces, these are not fraudulent acts. These are acts that are based on a marketplace that has fundamentally changed over the last 6 months, as we discussed for the last 45 minutes. Very good. Another question here from Janice Green. She's asking, do you think that forbearance is going to create a short sale or REO market? I think forbearance, for the most part, is probably a very good idea. For the most part, and the way it's been handled for the most part, by simply tacking the payments on to the end of the loans, will minimize any damage from forbearance. That having been said, I do think we're going to see an increase in foreclosures. There's no question in my mind that, particularly, the fact that forbearance is so much higher among high loan LTV loans, that it's so much higher among the FHA segment. We have to understand that some of those homes are going to be in a position where, when all said and done, given some of the permanent job losses, those are going to hit the market as short sales and foreclosures. I don't think it's going to be very significant, and I think it's going to be less so. Again, you guys are in a different position. I think it's going to be less so in your marketplace, quite frankly, for a whole series of reasons. But the fact of the matter is, I would expect what has been pretty much a zero short sale, zero foreclosure market. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we're going to see that back to the historical norms, which could be 2 to 3% of the marketplace by the first or second quarter of next year. So have to refresh ourselves on how to do those. I don't think it's going to be a large segment of the marketplace, but there will be people who need to be helped. And again, I think it's an opportunity for realtors. If you know people in forbearance and you can, assess their situations with them, acting earlier is always better for those people. And that's really, a role that I've seen realtors play so often. As I tell, my lender friends, when somebody's in trouble, they aren't calling you, they're calling their realtor. And if you get those kind of calls, really sit down and be honest and work with that client and assess where they are. And as I said earlier, this is a great time to sell. Earlier action might be better.
Right. Early in your presentation, you talked a lot about the unemployment and what those numbers have looked like the last 5 months. A lot of those jobs are being reinstituted basically from the service industry side, which is where we saw the largest loss of jobs. Do you think that next year businesses are going to basically be looking at themselves very differently based on COVID, and the unemployment numbers are going to be different as restaurants and retail may be opening? Other companies are going to be looking at completely redoing their organizations, which could result in a different wave of unemployment claims.
I think that's possible, Mark. I'm not that worried about that, to be honest with you. I think the service jobs in particular are going to come back once it's safe. I think the real issue for all of us is that safety issue and the regulations around it. We obviously want to, make sure our communities are safe. I think those are going to come back. I think where you're going to see the job losses, though, are on certain sectors. On travel, it's going to take 2 to 4 years for travel to come back. You're going to see it in a few other areas, but by and large, I would like to think by the end of next year, and I don't really think it makes much difference who's president. By the end of next year, I would like to think that almost all jobs will be back. You've got a lot of people leaving the labor force also. The baby boomers are leaving the labor force, so that creates a balance. For a while I worry about job shortage, but I think it's a transitory, but it's not going to be immediate, and I think it could be up to 18 months before we see it almost back to where it was, and it could even be longer to be exactly back where it was. But for the next 18 months, it's uncharted territory.
Very good. One more question. It says from Mr. Doug Shepard. It says, could you address Prop 15, and if it's passed, what would it be? What would its impacts be here in California? And then, what role is C.A.R. playing to address this potential proposition?
Yeah. So Prop 15, I think everyone knows, is the split roll. And the intention there is to take everything other than residential property and assess and tax it at a much higher level. It is the #1 tax increase effort by the legislature this year. It should raise about $9.5 billion coming out of those industries who would be affected. It is obviously going to be very, very damaging to those industries. From those industries standpoint, the good news, and C.A.R. I think takes this as good news as well, is that measure is not doing well. I don't anticipate that it will pass. C.A.R. has historically always opposed split roll. That is our policy, but we have not taken specific action on Prop 15 at this point, in part because we have other fish to fry, and because it wasn't clear when our board last met. They were still looking at 2 different initiatives at that point in time. And C.A.R. will be taking action on that. My guess is we'll oppose it. The thing that I do want to just tell people, though, that I think is important, I don't think they're looking for funding for us, and I don't think residential real estate should be funding the commercial interests at all. Let's keep in mind that one thing has changed, and I do think we need to look at this, and that is in 1978 with Prop 13, non-residential was over 60% of the tax roll, the property tax roll. Today, non-residential is only 30-something% of the tax roll. And to make matters a little worse, I think from our standpoint, residential real estate got smacked hard at the federal level. Our tax incentives, our mortgage interest deductibility has been cut, while the incentives for commercial, and I think these are good, they've created economic growth, have been made much, much richer, particularly by the last tax act a couple of years back. So, I think they're going to be okay this time, but I think the discussion that has to happen is perhaps they should be reassessed the same way residential real estate is reassessed. The reason that has gone from 60+% to 35% or so, depending on what numbers you look at, is because commercial transactions don't get reassessed upon sale the way residentials do. If you're doing a stock transfer, they don't get reassessed. And that's an issue where I think they would be doing themselves a favor, and C.A.R. needs to look at its policy in that regard. But hopefully it'll fail in November, and we'll have a couple years to see what the right way to go is. And in the meantime, having just talked to the Business Roundtable and the chamber guys, they're not looking for money from us. They've got a war chest that's going to be used as needed to defeat this measure in November.
Good, good. Joel, I want to be sensitive to your time, so I just have one last question. Rose is asking, she says, what do you think, if anything, can be done in reducing the franchise tax of the 3 1/3% on investment properties? Anything?
I'm not hopeful. I wish something could be done. I just have to tell you, the fiscal condition of the state and most localities too is just so disastrous that there's almost no likelihood of getting any tax relief in California these days. I'd be less than candid with you if I said anything else. This state is facing incredible deficits just on the budget side of, they're saying 55 billion. My suspicion is it might be higher. If we throw in retiree pension and health care, they're looking at probably 400 billion more. This state's fiscal crisis is real. It was caused by a number of things, including, from my perspective, not the best management. I'm being very charitable there. Very charitable, quite frankly, because they haven't looked at this issue the way they should have for many years. But the problem that makes is it's almost impossible to get tax relief.
Right.
Just makes it impossible. That is an issue that we always look at. And I do think in California, the one area where we are undertaxed, and I want to keep it that way, is residential real estate property taxes, where we're at 1%. And it's an enormous amount given our prices, but that's really where our focus has to be. And there's going to be challenges to that, as we're already seeing.
Right. Well, Joel, I want to thank you again for your participation today, for taking time out of your schedule and sharing with the IVAR membership a number of key issues. I want to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. And with that, we are concluded. We're done. And everybody have a great upcoming weekend. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
All right. Great. Thank you.